Today, I'm interviewing one of the editors of the POMS special issue on new supply chain in times of turbulence. This special issue is about how global supply chains should be redesigned under persistent turbulence, such as tariffs and export controls, geopolitics, climate driven disruptions, and macro instability, and how strategies like diversification, regional reconfiguration, financing, and digital technologies change the resilience cost trade off depending on the source of turbulence. So today I have with me Professor Albert Y. Ha. He is Y. Learn Foundation Professor of Business at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. He received his PhD degree from Graduate School of Business of Stanford University. His current research interests are supply chain management and online retail platform operations. He has published in major academic journals such as Management Science, Operations Research, Manufacturing and Service Operations Management, and Production and Operations Management. He currently serves as a department editor of Production and Operations Management and has served as an associate editor of Management Science, Operations Research, and Manufacturing and Service Operations Management. Professor Ha, thanks again for joining. I'm interviewing you today on behalf of the OM community that is interested in the POM special issue on new supply chain in times of turbulence. The goal is to help potential authors understand what kind of questions, settings, and methods the editors are most excited to see.
Thank you very much. And I want to take this opportunity to thank the journal for giving us the opportunities to publish this special issue. We think that the theme is very timely and open many opportunities for interesting research.
I completely agree. The theme of this special issue is definitely very timely, considering the current news that we all see. One thing I briefly wanted to mention: you have very graciously agreed to incorporate the views of the other two editors of this special issue, Professor Ying Ju Chen from HKUST and Professor Howley from Stanford University. And thank you for doing that. We'll try to keep this to about 15 to 20 minutes. I have prepared 8 short questions for you. So to start, when you think about the motivation for this special issue, what was the gap you and the other editors most wanted to address?
Well, our main motivation comes from our interaction with business executive and the information that we get from mass media. As we know, in the past few years, a lot of supply chain face severe challenges due to disruption, due to pandemic like COVID-19, and then we have severe climate changes. For example, we have extreme heat in China a few years back that led to closing down of factory. And of course, more recently, we see some major geopolitical conflict, and we have trade war and banning of important material, tariff, and things like that. So we see that supply chain turbulence has becoming a common term that we see in many mass media and in professional magazines and outlets. Now, at my university, we have an institute called LF Supply Chain Management Institute. We organized a conference with the same theme, Supply Chain in Times of Turbulence, in last December. In this conference, it's 2 days. On the first day, we have speakers from industry. On the second day, we have speakers from academia. So what we heard is there's a lot of concern from industry executive about the turbulence and how these create major problem to their company. And they also share some of their strategies in mitigating the damage of these turbulence. So we believe that is the time that we want to encourage research in this important area, and hopefully we can provide some useful insight and guidance to managers to tackle these challenges.
Thank you for sharing the motivation. But when you say turbulence, what dimensions matter most for authors to measure? Is it about frequency versus severity, predictability, geographic scope, compounding shocks, or something else?
Well, that's an excellent question. If you think about supply chain risk, it's not new. There's a lot of research on how we manage supply chain risk in terms of supply and demand. But now turbulence is a bit different in that it's due to systematic risk and very difficult to predict. think about trade war, right, or tariff, is due to the interactions of many countries. And then sometimes it's not uncommon that tariffs are imposed extensively to many countries. And then there could be due to negotiation and things like that. So it's very difficult to predict, but then the impact is huge. It's not on one or two companies, it's across multiple industries. So we believe that that will create new challenges, that we probably may need new solutions.
Mm.
And I would say that there are different dimensions, and probably the unpredictability is one important characteristics
Mhm.
of turbulence, and of course the severity. But it will really depend on the industry and on the specific sources of these turbulence.
Okay. What do you see as the 2 to 3 most significant unresolved research questions at the intersection of supply chain strategy and turbulence?
Well, again, supply chain risk management is not new. If we think about the traditional supply disruption, so usually we would advise companies to make supply chain resilience, meaning that when there's disruption, supply chain need to resist, withstand, and respond and restore.
Mm.
So in order to create this resilience, then we know that we probably need to create capability in terms of like adaptability, flexibility, agility, and things like that. And how do we create this capability? There are some common strategies, like doing supply diversification, building buffer inventory, or doing supply chain collaboration, working with suppliers to improve this capability. And there has been a lot of research on this issue. But now, if you think about supply chain turbulence, then we are talking about highly unpredictable, highly impactful damages to supply chain. So I would think that resilience is still important, but then we may need more capability. So it's an open question, is what kind of capability we need in order to make supply chain resilience for these extreme turbulence. And if you think about the current practices in supply chain management, the role of technology is very important, right? So when we can incorporate new technologies like blockchain or IoT, then maybe we can create visibility in the supply chain. Then we can better focus on the weakest link of the supply chain, and that could help company to mitigate the damage of supply chain turbulence. So I think in terms of resilience, we do want to understand more about what kind of capability that supply chain need to create and what kind of strategies will best meet these needs. So this is one thing. And then after talking to a lot of industry people, we see that a lot of companies nowadays reconfigure their supply chain. Global supply chain become more regionalized. So in this case, when companies go about configuring their supply chain, then what is the impact on sustainability and maybe on the welfare of the developing economy? So that will relate not only to turbulence, but also to sustainability that we know that is really important. And then when companies have to reconfigure their supply chain, then that means they need to utilize resources. How to finance the transformation of the supply chain? That's another important issue. So I think these are all of great interest to industry executives.
That is very insightful. I hope authors get some ideas based on that answer. Uh, One more thing about research is the theoretical and or managerial contribution that authors need to make when they write research papers. What would make a submission stand out in terms of the theoretical and or managerial contribution?
Okay, that's a very important question, right? As we know, POM is a top academic journals. So the usual criteria apply, meaning that in order to get a paper published, we are looking at the novelty, we are looking at the significance of the contribution, and of course, we need to meet the high standard of scientific rigor in terms of the methodology, in terms of doing the analysis and coming with the correct conclusion. And of course, writing is also very important. For a top academic journal, we want the paper to be written well, to be able to communicate key idea effectively. Now, back to this special issue because it's highly motivated by practices and the current challenges in the industry. So I would say that besides meeting all the usual criteria, then if a paper be can score high on relevant to practice, that will really stand out. Meaning that in terms of addressing a important questions that are of great interest to industry executives that can help them to improve the supply chain, given turbulence that they are facing.
Okay. Uh, you list a few topics in the call for papers, such as supply chain capability, supply diversification, supply chain configuration, trade financing, and technology. Among the listed topics, where do you feel there is most room for novel insights right now?
Well, I would say that this is a really difficult question. So we have spent a lot of time to discuss among the three of us, the co-editor, and then we talk to our colleagues. So we come up with this list of topics.
Mm.
These are extensive but not exhaustive. So I mean, these are just some examples of the topics that are relevant to the theme. So it's hard to say which is more important or which has more potential. I will leave that to the potential authors to think about in what area that they want to address the problem. And of course, this is a difficult problem in terms of helping companies to sail through the supply chain turbulence. So we may need to have solution by taking different perspective and attacking the problem from different angles.
Okay, that's a nice way to dodge the question, I would say. Uh, one more thing that call for paper highlights is technologies, different technologies like blockchain, AI, and stablecoin. What's your guidance for authors to make technology papers rigorous and prescriptive rather than speculative?
Okay, now from a supply chain management point of view, technology is wielded as enabler to enable the supply chain to create capabilities that is necessary for success, right? So in that case, I think we want to look at how technology can be integrated in supply chain as part of the process. And in order to make that relevant and not too speculative, I think it's important to have the right evidence or maybe even data to support how technology can enable a supply chain to improve. So, for example, if we want look at the blockchain, right? So maybe we can look at some example that company like Walmart had actually implemented the technology and to get what kind of result that we will get. And then we can do research about how we can extend this practice to other company or maybe to other industry. So in that case, we are not looking at technology from isolation. We need to have concrete evidence and data to support how we can do research about using technology as an enabler to improve supply chain capability
Mm.
in time of turbulence.
Right. Another important thing for publishing a paper in a journal like POM is rigor via analytical modeling, econometrics, and field experimentation. What are some common pitfalls authors should avoid when submitting to this special issue?
Okay, that's a great question. So again, rigor is a very important criterion. So even if we have novelty, we have significance, but if we do not have enough rigor, then it cannot qualify for publication in a top journal like POM, right? So this is given. But talking about the pitfalls, I think the best way to think about this pitfall is maybe to follow a common approach to write a paper for a top journal. So I would say that based on my experience as an author and as an editor, so a common approach is the following. First, you have to identify a research problem based on the motivation from practices. And then we will review the literature and hopefully we can identify a gap that so far we cannot find a theory from literature that can explain or or to address the research problem. And then based on that, we can propose some research questions and then find the right methodology to answer this question. After that, we do some analysis, maybe doing modeling, maybe looking at the data. Then we summarize the main finding and highlight the contribution. And the last step, I think, is really important is to position your contribution relative to literature to show that this is novel and significant, right? So I think this is not the only approach, but this is a common approach that I think works. So given this approach, then what are the possible pitfalls? So one is that we may have some interesting model, but then what if there's not enough motivation? So it can be an interesting mathematical problem, but it may not be an interesting research problem. So I think it's really important that we need to have enough motivation uh, based on practical evidence in order to motivate the research. Another thing is after we have identified the research problem, then we want to know, has that been solved? Will we be able to find a solution based on the existing literature? So that's why we need to do a complete literature review before we can identify the gap. So after that, then we have to frame the research question correctly. So for example, again, if you may pose a research question that may be of less relevance to managers, that may not be so interesting. So in this case, you want to frame the research questions in a way that can provide the right insight to the practitioner. And sometimes I find that sometimes papers, some authors may be ambitious. They try to do a lot of things with a lot of result, but then there's not enough main message or theme. So that may not be so ideal from the reader's point of view. You want to be able to guide the readers to some main messages that are really important, and you may not need to have a very long paper.
Thank you so much for that detailed roadmap for the authors. I think that was very useful for anyone working on any of the papers, not just for this special issue, but in general as well. Uh, could you briefly walk us through the review process and how the editorial team plans to ensure timely decisions?
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's really important. Now, first of all, it will follow the usual review process of POM, right? Because it's a special issue of the journal. So we want to meet the high standard of the journal. But having said that, we do want to be able to publish the special issue in a timely manner. So we are targeting to have a uh, smooth review process such that we will aim for two revision, a major revision and a minor revision. So that will means that we have to go through 3 rounds of review. So if everything goes well, then we will be able to get the paper accepted or to converse after 2 revision. And again, time is of great importance. So the co-editors, so we will work very closely to monitor the review process and remind the SE and the reviewer about the deadline. But again, so we want to manage the time, but we will not lower the standard in terms of acceptance.
Okay, this
And
is
then I
not.
want to say that now this is the ideal process when we can get convergence with 2 revisions, one
Hmm.
major, one minor. But sometimes that may not always happen. So in this case, if colleagues submit a paper, but then it may take more iteration. So this is fine. If we cannot meet the deadlines of publishing in the special journal issues, we can always put that in the regular issue of POM. That would not be a problem.
Right. We don't want to let good papers go like, just
Of
because they
course,
didn't
of
work.
course.
So, finally, was there anything we missed that you would like to share with the authors? Any closing thoughts, remarks?
Well, I think the list of interview questions is quite extensive, so pretty much cover everything that we want to say. But lastly, I do want to appeal again to the research community that this is a really important theme that is timely and open up many interesting research opportunities. So I will encourage colleagues who have paper that are relevant do try to think about submitting to this special issue in order to create more visibility and hopefully more impact. And again, I want to thank the journal for giving us the opportunity to publish this special issue. And thanks for the invitation to the interview.
Thank you, Professor Ha. And yes, please submit to this special issue. This is a very timely topic, very important topic in the current context. You can create a very big impact uh, by publishing a paper in POMS. And thank you so much. Thanks again for listening. That was my conversation with Professor Albert Waiha from HKUST Business School, sharing the editorial team's perspective on the POM special issue, New Supply Chain in Times of Turbulence. If you are considering a submission, I hope this helped clarify the kinds of questions, settings, and contributions the editors are most excited to see. My key takeaway is that strong submissions will connect turbulence to a clear mechanism, use rigorous methods, and offer actionable implications for supply chain design and strategy. Check the call for papers for deadlines and scope. And thank you for tuning in.